coming up.
Minister, in the main estimates, it stated $46.5 billion was required simply to service our debt. This is in addition to this year's $39.8 billion deficit. Now, in the supplementary estimates, you have come back and asked for another $1.9 billion, as though this $1.9 billion was an oversight to service the national debt.
You oversee government spending and related rules. Can you assure this committee that you've never used government resources as part of a leadership campaign?
I caution you to be really careful with the language that you're using.
If you will not listen to the Prime Minister's office regarding your leadership campaign, I hope you will at least listen to Canadians. Thank you very much.
Like and subscribe.
The opening on time. We'll start with Mrs. Kusi, please, for 6 minutes.
When you tabled the main estimates, you stated your governance ministers are acting like all other Canadians in examining their own pocketbooks. That was your quote. Do you believe that Canadians have examined their pocketbooks and have decided that they can spend more the way you have? Is that really what you're thinking? That they are examining their pocketbooks and are making the decision to spend more and can spend more as you are? I don't think they are. What would you like to tell Canadians on that, please?
Well, Mr. Chair, I do appreciate the question, and the intention of that point was to say that this is a time where we need to be prudent with our spending, and at the Treasury Board of Canada, our role is to oversee government spending and to ensure that we undertake a risk analysis at all times of that spending.
Thank you.
And
being
so
prudent
when
with
we
your
table
spending,
the main
Minister,
estimates, that is the goal.
How do you think the younger generation looks right now at you and your government with a $39.8 billion deficit in the current budget? Do you really think they believe that you are being prudent with a $39.8 billion deficit that not only this generation, but the next generation is going to have to pay off? Do you really think that's being prudent, Minister?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7 and a AAA credit rating. And at the same time, we are maintaining that fiscal prudent track, and we are also providing supports to Canadians through dental care, through pharmacare, contraception for women so that they can make their own choices about their
Canadians,
bodies.
when
Mr.
they're standing
Chair.
in line at the food bank, don't care about the debt to GDP ratio. They don't care about that. They just care that their tummies are empty and that they want food on the table to feed their families.
Unlike the Conservative government
Minister,
before
the
us.
government is currently spending
Chair,
more
point-
on
point
debt
of order.
servicing costs than they are in health
point of
transfer
order.
payments.
Sorry,
I'm
Mr.
just trying to-
Kusi, Minister, sorry. There's a point of order. I'll stop the clock. Mr. Kuzmirchuk.
Mr. Chair, I just want us to take into consideration our translators and the
I
fact
will.
that
That's not a point of order, but I will let you know.
It is a point of order.
Sorry, Mr.
because,
Kuzmirchuk, when
Mr. Chair,
the translators have an issue, they'll advise the clerk, and the clerk will advise me, and we will interrupt. I appreciate your point.
I'm just worried about their health and well-being, and I
have
see
ruled, Mr.
and I see the
Kuzmirchuk, we're gonna
MP
go
raising.
back to-
I see my MP colleague raising her voice.
Okay.
And I'm just simply asking
Okay,
that we
I've
respect
ruled,
the
Mr.
translators.
Kuzmirchuk. I appreciate what we're trying to do. I've made it very clear. I made it clear to one of your colleagues earlier. I appreciate we don't continue in interruptions.
I appreciate you taking that into
Kusi will
consideration.
continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, in the main estimates, it stated $46.5 billion was required simply to service our debt. This is in addition to this year's $39.8 billion deficit. Now, in the supplementary estimates, you have come back and asked for another $1.9 billion, as though this $1.9 billion was an oversight to service the national debt. Why were these numbers not properly accounted for in your main estimates just a few months ago? And what can we as Canadians expect in the future in terms of further amounts that have not been accounted for as a result of your bad accounting?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, on the issue of poverty, our government, unlike the Conservative government prior to us, we've reduced poverty in this country by 22%. On the issue of the debt, I will say that our government has made a decision to ensure that we have strong fiscal markers like a AAA credit rating, like the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7, while supporting Canadians, while ensuring that we have affordable housing supports in place, while ensuring that we have dental care available for our population
Then, Minister,
and pharmacare
why
as
are
well,
1 in
Mr.
4
Chair.
Canadians skipping meals? Again, the 1 in 4 Canadians that are skipping meals really don't take comfort in these statistics that you are saying here today or in the House of Commons when you are responding in question period. Minister, in your last announcement on fraud, as a result of the Arrive scam scandal, with the Canadian procurement system, you stated that the 3 individuals you found committing $5 million worth of fraud in contracting were only the first tranche of individuals. Are you ready today to tell Canadians the number of individuals who you have determined to be committing fraud and you have now turned over to the RCMP? Can you give that number, please?
That issue is within PSPC, but I will say that all fraud is unacceptable and that the RCMP has charge over those cases. And if it determines to lay charges, we will be supporting the RCMP in every investigation it undertakes, just as we have done in the past.
Okay, so you don't have a number for us today.
It is not within my purview.
Can you tell us the total? It is within your purview, and especially given that you were previously the Minister of Procurement, you should have an idea as to these numbers. If you can't tell us how many individuals have been turned over to the RCMP as a result of fraud, can you at least please tell Canadians how much they have been scammed out of, how much fraudulent money has been paid out as a result of
Actually,
of this
Mr.
fraud?
Chair, 3 individuals, to my knowledge, have been turned over to the RCMP. And secondly, Mr. Chair, what I am doing at Treasury Board, and this is within my purview actually, is to ensure that we have the policies and the governance in place to ensure that we have better management control over these types of incidents.
My
Today,
last question
I released
is,
a new manager's
you said
guide
at the
with
last meeting
mandatory
that you would have
on
that you would recruit the money from the Arrive scam scandal. Can you report to Canadians that you have gotten that $60 million back for the Arrive scam
I can
scandal?
report to Canadians that as soon as the RCMP report comes back on the Arrive can issue,
So that's
we
a
will
no.
follow
You
the...
promised the last time I saw you
Chair,
that you would
point
get
of-
the
point
money
of
back
order.
for
I mean,
Canadians.
this is-
That's what you said, and you are coming
Excuse
to
me,
today.
Mr. Chair,
Sorry,
am I
let me-
able to
sorry, let me
respond
interrupt. We have
to
another
that
point of
witness's
order.
question?
Sorry, we have a point of order from Mr. Kazmierczak. We have to attend. Go ahead, Mr.
Mr. Chair, I'm just
Kazmierczak.
asking my colleagues to please respect, again, our interpreters and
Mr.
their health and
Kazmierczak, if you're
safety.
going
This is
to, I've made
important.
it clear, and I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I've made it clear that if there's an issue with the interpreters, they will contact our clerk.
Okay.
I would ask you to please stop your interruptions.
It's not an interruption.
It
I'm
is,
actually
Mr.
looking
Kazmierczak,
after the
and if you're gonna
interpreters
continue
on
this,
committee. Mr.
Time
Chair-
will be taken
Mr.
away from
Chair,
others.
if
I've
you
made
won't
my
look after
ruling
it,
very
I
clearly.
certainly will.
Mr. Kazmierczak, please. I've stated before, and I've told one of your colleagues before this,
Okay.
if there's an issue, they will advise the clerk the proper way. They will not advise you. They will not advise your other members. They'll advise the clerk. So I ask you, please stop with such interruptions. Mrs. Kusi, Minister, I
respond?
understand.
Can I
I understand,
respond at
Mrs.
all,
Kusi
ever,
and
here?
Minister. I understand what you're saying. If you please allow a question and an answer, you have 40 seconds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can you tell Canadians today, clearly, as you promised them the last time that we spoke in a committee environment, that you have recouped the $60+ million because, as the Auditor General indicated, it is a minimum of $60 million. You have recouped those funds for Canadians as you promised you would.
Mr. Speaker, there is an ongoing investigation. Any wrongdoing will be taken into account. I stand by my comments that the government will seek to recover taxpayers' money that was spent
That's a no, Mr. Chair.
inappropriately.
That's
We
clearly
are
a no.
waiting for the RCMP investigation to conclude.
That's a no.
Thank you. Minister, you oversee government spending and related rules. Can you assure this committee that you've never used government resources as part of a leadership campaign?
I most definitely can confirm that I have never done that and would never do that. And I actually am surprised that you would ask the question, but I have never done that.
Thank you, Minister. I think people understand that it's an important question. Have any directives been issued to ensure that other ministers are following the rules as well?
Ministers and public servants are expected to follow all rules, period.
But no directives have been issued specifically on that?
It is important for everyone to follow the policies of the Government of Canada, as well as the conflict of interest policies that all MPs are required to follow.
Thank you, Minister. I think that's clear on the record in terms of what was asked and what was answered. You know, we're here reviewing Indigenous contracting as well. Documents have been received that reveal that a small number of nominally Indigenous firms were able to act as brokers between the federal government and other potentially non-Indigenous companies, simply getting contracts and subcontracting. This allows the contracts to fit into an Indigenous contracting quota, even though Indigenous people do not actually benefit because the subcontractors may be all or mostly non-Indigenous. These companies are essentially using the Dalian or GC Strategies model. I want to ask you, when a company gets a contract under an Indigenous set-aside, is there an expectation or a requirement that some percentage of subcontracts also go to Indigenous firms?
Indigenous Services Canada manages the list of Indigenous businesses that are qualified Indigenous contracting companies, but PSPC manages this overall, and I will say that departments are responsible for making a request to IST to conduct a post-award audit, and the audit has to be requested when there's any suspicion at all that the requirements of the applicable policy haven't been met through delivery, and Indigenous Services Canada.
Can I just clarify my question, Minister, and I'd love to hear your response on this. Do the requirements include that a certain percentage of subcontracts from an Indigenous contracting situation, that a certain percentage of the subcontracts go to Indigenous companies? And are the subcontractors tracked in any way?
Right now, the percentage is 33%. In other words, the contractor's delivery of goods or services and monitoring the contractor's compliance with the 33% Indigenous content requirement for contracting companies.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was looking for, and I appreciate that, the 1/3 requirement there. Is that tracked? Because the committee asked for subcontracting information, and we received, in almost all cases, zero information about subcontracts. So I'm a bit mystified about how the government would know if that requirement is being met, if subcontracting is not being tracked in any case.
I actually just want to clarify my answer, and then I want to add one thing. It's 33% for the contract. That would be verified in the post-audit that ISC does. And on your question about subcontractors, I actually think it is a good point, and I think that we should do continual work to be able to track the suppliers in the subcontracting process.
Yeah, Minister, I really appreciate that comment. That's the first time I've ever questioned a minister and had an acknowledgement of an important point, because I think there is a gap. We received no information on subcontracts. We didn't get an answer from the previous minister. So I hope we'll have agreement from this committee, from you, to refine that process so we're actually tracking subcontracting information. I want to ask one more question on this. There seem to be instances where a few small number of companies are getting an outsized proportion of overall contracts. How much would you say is too much for a single company to get of that total share of Indigenous procurement? Keeping in mind that there's over 600 Indigenous communities in this country, how much would be too much for a single company to get of that total?
I do not have the ability to respond to that question without an overall amount of the actual contract. But I will say that the principle that we operate under is fair, open, and transparent competition. And the 5% floor for Indigenous contracts that we established as a government was meant to ensure that Indigenous suppliers have access to government contracts.
Thank you very much. Ms. Atwin, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to address really quickly, I see that Mr. Generous is particularly interested in the Indigenous business procurement strategy, which is great, but I would caution you to be really careful with the language that you're using. Nominally Indigenous, I'm not sure where you're going with that. I think Indigenous identity is very complex, and I would just caution you to be careful around that discussion.
I know there's a lot of concern and interest in the return to work directive that your government has provided to public sector workers. And I think, one of the curious things about this is what the core rationale for that directive is. We see that most of the departmental reports have indicated that productivity has either gone up or at least remained level for public sector workers working at home. What was the core rationale for providing that directive?
Just a quick answer, please.
The decision of the public service that was made relating to hybrid was made as a result of its view that it is fully within their ability to do that under existing policy without being a breach of collective agreement, because this stands outside of the collective agreement. In terms of an explanation of the policy, because it was not a political decision, I will turn to the public servants to
Actually,
answer that question.
I'm afraid we're out of time. We can either follow it up on Monday when the officials are back with us, or unless the minister wishes to stay past her hour.
It's very kind
Mrs.
of you,
Kusi,
Mr. Chair.
go ahead,
I will
please.
defer to the officials on Monday.
Minister, the CBSA border officers voted last week to approve a strike due to the lack of a contract for the last 2 years. Their demands include wage parity, protection from management retaliation, access to telework, and protection from CBSA's obsessive reliance on contracting out, very similar to your own government and your own department, Minister. Now, you have outlined briefly the process which you are undertaking. But if you are not successful, as your predecessor was not successful, and in fact, I think her legacy, unfortunately, is built on that lack of success in reaching these negotiations in a reasonable amount of time successfully. If you are not successful, can you share with Canadians the total amount that this will have an effect on the economy? How many in the billions will this affect the Canadian economy if you are not successful? Can you tell Canadians that, please?
Actually, it is premature for us to put precise figures on the table. We are still in the midst of ensuring that we reach a fair and reasonable agreement with the CBSA. We are committed to working with bargaining agents to reach an agreement that is fair and reasonable, and we will do so at the table. And I would be more than happy to return to this committee and speak to the particular numbers, but at this time it is premature for me to put numbers on the table in the type of question that I've just received.
I don't think it is premature, Minister, because if we look at the costs of the port strikes in both Vancouver and Montreal last year, it was $10 billion. $10 billion that had the effect on this economy, especially at a time when your government is in out of control spending, when we need this economy to function so bad. Your government failed, your predecessor failed in getting these negotiations resolved in a timely manner, which cost the economy $10 billion, and of course was also a hit to our tax revenues. So are you not concerned that we might see these numbers again? Should you not be successful? Do you have any comments for Canadians regarding that?
Of course, I have comments about our expenditures. I am the president of the Treasury Board, after all, and I will say that I will at all times have oversight and prudent oversight of government spending. What I mean by ensuring that we have a negotiation that occurs at the table is just that. The demands that are going to be the subject of those negotiations will yield, if all goes well, a fair and reasonable
Minister, I don't want to talk about
agreement
hypotheticals,
for
please,
the border
and
services
I wouldn't be so
workers.
excited to share your title with a $39.8 billion deficit, Minister. I also want to ask as well, relative that you've stated that your department is happy to return to the bargaining table to negotiate in good faith.
Yes, we are.
But it's been 2 years without a contract. So why are you only just trying now to complete this negotiation? Like I said, your predecessor failed. You're in the process of failing. What are you going to do to ensure that you get this across
I
the finish
actually
line?
do not think that we are in the process of failing. We are in the process of seeking a deal that is fair and reasonable to Government of Canada employees and to the Canadian taxpayers. And I would not think that hypotheticals of the sort that are being posed in this question would be useful in seeking to reach a fair and reasonable deal. And
Well,
I will
as
also
the official
say,
opposition, Madam President, we look at results. Now, in August
And
2023,
hypotheticals.
you were excited to announce that you were going to find $50.4 billion in savings across all government departments over the next 5 years. However, in Budget 2024, more than $52.9 billion in new spending over the next 5 years was announced. This new spending is now more than 3.5 times as much as you announced in savings in August. So how has this initiative done anything to show fiscal restraint with you, as you have said, the president of the Treasury Board, as with you being that, and prove to Canadians that your government can responsibly handle money?
well, I would take a look at the external markers that indicate fiscal prudence, Mr. Chair. A AAA credit rating is actually an independent assessment
Minister, these
of
are cold comfort. This is
Mr.
cold
Chair,
comfort
am I
for
going to be
Canadians.
able to
And if
respond to these questions?
If you will not
Mr.
listen to
Chair?
the Prime Minister's office regarding your leadership campaign, I hope you will at least listen to Canadians. Thank you very much.
I would really like to be able to respond to questions,
think-
Mr. Chair. It's
Yeah,
very
no, I appreciate that. I think it'll
unprofessional
be-
to interrupt me when I'm actually just trying to respond.
We're out of time, unfortunately.